I'm Archbishop Thomas Winsky here in Miami, and Cardinal Turkson is in Rome, and he'll be addressing us. But he is not a stranger to DART because he addressed our convening in Orlando in 2018. And so we say to him, welcome back, old friend. Cardinal Turkson is originally from Ghana, and after serving his church in his native country, was called to Rome for greater service, first as the head of the Pontifical Council for Justice and Peace. And after that council was reorganized and given a new name and an expanded mission, he is now the head of what is called a dicastery for promotion of integral human development. I think that's probably even a better name than the Council for Justice and Peace, because, one time they said that, the guy was, the bishop was walking around with a name tag saying he was in charge of justice and peace. And somebody in the elevator looked at him and said, "Are you in charge of justice and peace?" And the bishop said, "Yes, I am." And the person said, "Well, you better do a better job." So, but we're all about justice and peace, and we're all trying to do a better job. And Cardinal Turkson certainly is helping to focus the Universal Catholic Church on issues of justice and peace and of integral human development, including the care of creation. In fact, he came to the United States, to Florida, in the year some 5 years ago, shortly after Pope Francis's encyclical Laudato Si on the environment, on care for creation, and he addressed a distinguished group of scholars at St. Thomas University here in Miami Gardens. And later he came, as I said previously, to our convening our clergy conference in Orlando in 2018. He will be addressing what do we do after the pandemic. Again, the pandemic has revealed some of the problems that we knew we had, but has revealed it perhaps by raising in relief the difficulties that we are facing with inequality, the fragility of many of our institutions. The pandemic is not just a health crisis. It is bigger than just a health crisis. It also is an economic crisis because of the economic disruption that the pandemic has caused in this country and throughout the world. And also, accompanying the pandemic has been increasing incidences of social unrest that also are concerned, because that unrest is tearing off the scabs of many wounds that have yet to adequately heal in our country and in other places in the world. So I am very happy to present Cardinal Turkson, who I have been privileged to work with in a couple of instances, and I am happy to welcome him back to this gathering of the Clergy Conference of DART. So Cardinal Turkson, welcome, friend.
Thank you, Archbishop, and thanks to you all, Reverend Bishops and pastors and all people of God. Hi, Stephen, and all of you. Very warm greetings from here. I hope we're not getting you all out of your beds, because it must be pretty early in your part of the world. We just had lunch, and we're beginning to digest our lunch, so we'll be way ahead of you. But I trust you're all doing well and staying safe from the COVID, the virus. And I thank God that He's brought us all together and fashioned for us this occasion to share thoughts and exchange ideas about how to create a better world after this COVID, after this pandemic. So I want to thank the organizers of the DART meeting for having invited me and for making space for me to share a few thoughts with you. And I do that in great humility, not having all the answers. And so as I guess, so I carry on from where Archbishop Wensky left off, and it is a reminder that what we're dealing with started as a healthcare crisis, but it's gone way beyond that. And as Pope Francis likes to say, the crisis of the healthcare is exposed a lot of other crises in our society. So it began as a healthcare crisis, but it's also now a human development crisis, crisis of economics and economy, crisis of food security, crisis even sometimes in some places of governance, and crisis of a lot of joblessness, and so very many other disruptions in human society. So, though invited, I'm invited to talk about our thing is life after the pandemic. So it's a little bit in the future, but the future starts from the present, from now. And so the life after the pandemic begins right now with what we do with the pandemic and how we see ourselves through the pandemic. That is going to fashion for us life after the pandemic in whichever way. So it's kind of important that we're able to gain a very wholesome understanding of the present situation, so that based on that we can also kind of fashion trajectories into the future. So it is clear, my dear friends, that we cannot start again as before in the aftermath of the healthcare crisis, which has affected every other thing. And we cannot pretend to go back to, we talk about the new normal, as it were. And last week, the World Economic Forum gathered again, and they're talking about fixing the future again and starting a new, a new beginning, as it were. But last year in March, when this pandemic was beginning to wreak havoc here in Italy, Pope Francis invited our dicastery, our office, to create a commission to follow the experience of the COVID around the world, local churches, to see what the experiences and try to encourage them in the way they deal with this. When he did that, he invited us to prepare the future. It wasn't to prepare for the future, but it was to prepare the future. It just meant that we needed to identify what has gone wrong in the present system and try to imagine or re-image, as it were, the future with all of everything that has gone wrong, repaired, healed, and rendered wholesome to lead the world in a better future. So preparing the future was the mandate that we had. And preparing the future just meant that we needed to look critically at the present situation to be able to prepare the future. And so if we talk about the crisis, incidentally now, we're not living only with the crisis of the pandemic, but as it were, we're living with threefold crisis. We have the crisis of the pandemic that is with us, but we also have the crisis, as it were, of climate, for those who believe in climate change and for whom the Pacific Islands sea levels rising constitute a threat. For them, there is also a crisis, and we're facing also the crisis of social security, joblessness, and people losing livelihoods and all of that. So we have all of these crises before us. But what do we do with the crisis? Crisis, as severally interpreted, is always an occasion. It's always an occasion to fashion something new. It's almost like a crossroad experience where you try to discern where you've come from and where it is better to go. And in this regard, Pope Francis reminds us that we should aim not to come out of this crisis the same way. We should come out of this crisis differently, improved upon everything that we had, having healed and reconciled everything, so that that whatever we come out of us is far better than how we enter into this crisis. And in the light of that, if we were to ask, okay, if we're not to come out of this crisis the same way, but to come out of this crisis differently, how may we do that? And how we may do that as kind of, we have a small help to answer that from his predecessor, so Pope Benedict, who facing the financial crisis had this to say. The crisis we're in invite us to reprogram our journey and to regenerate the future. And if we're looking for how to do this, he says that the current crisis we're in, and present our threefold of them, they oblige us to replan our journey, to set ourselves new values, and to discover new forms of commitment, to build on positive experiences and to reject negative experiences. And then he goes on to say the crisis, when seen this way, becomes an opportunity for discernment on how to shape a new vision for the future. So invited to talk about the future after the crisis, I cannot help but begin with this observation. So the crisis involves us to replan our journey, set for ourselves new trajectories and new rules, so that we're able to improve upon whatever situation has led us into this crisis and now how our present experiences, and to so formulate for ourselves a new vision. And so it goes on to say, in this spirit, with confidence rather than with resignation, we then go on to address the present crisis. And how may we do that? In the present crisis, we gathered as clergymen or leaders, church leaders of people, it is important to recognize that the normality which we are invited to fashion invite us to do this as a missionary church, missionary set of disciples, in anticipating and prefiguring on earth with our own lives, actions, policies, and decisions, what God's kingdom must be for us and for those in the future. So we're thinking of a kingdom of justice. We're thinking about a kingdom of peace. We're thinking about a kingdom of equality. And among our brothers and sisters, all of us having one God as a father, and all of us living as his children. And so, as it were, in order to prefigure or to imagine a more just and wholesome society, more inclusive, sustainable with all its structures, it is important to recognize what this COVID has exposed for all of us. It's shown weaknesses in our social structures and systems. It's shown how fragile our own lives as human beings are, how we can fall sick, and about 5,000, almost 500,000 or 400,000 people dead already in the US and several other places. So that's how vulnerable and how fragile our own existences are. And fragile as we are, we also tend to build structures which are equally fragile. And unless we build these structures with the grace and the support of God, it becomes a vicious circle of fragile people or fragile beings building fragile structures and not finding a way to hold on to the hand of God and build more sustainable structures. We end up repeating fragile structures, and we become ultimately victims of the fragile structures that we ourselves create. And therefore, we come to do this as people of, first and foremost, as people of faith, people of the gospel, inspired as it were by the theological virtues of faith, hope, and charity. With this as beacon, we set forth to repair all the ills of our society and make ourselves the builders of a future that is more wholesome without all the challenges and all the defects that we discover in the present system. So the point of departure for all of us as people of faith is the point of departure of people rooted in the theological virtues of faith, hope, and charity. Faith in the assurance of the presence of God for us, hope in the fact that we can dream of a future with God on our side, and charity as a way of life, as an ethic of life, as people living in this new kingdom. So that's how I think we want to set off, and the observations or my small thoughts that I like to share will be from that point of view. Aside people of faith, enlivened by the trust in God's own presence with that which enkindled within us the sense of faith, we go to build a future. So with this then, we come first and foremost with Jesus to try to heal our broken world and to heal our broken systems. So the first task that we have, trying to prepare a post-COVID future, is the thing about finding out and learning to heal our society, to heal our world systems and structures so that they can adopt a more wholesome character and more wholesome form of doing all of this. So with Jesus the healer, we undertake to heal the systems that describe our lives on earth, whether they be economic, whether they be social, whether they be political, whatever they are, these are systems to be healed so that they can also heal the human person. That being the case, the pandemic has shown humanity to be very vulnerable, but it's also shown humanity to be very interconnected and the need to care for the poor on the earth. So the vulnerability of the human person reflects other social ills that need to be healed, principally the appreciation of the value and the character of the human person itself, and the very many negative tendencies that can afflict its life. So the first point of our healing is healing for our sense of the human person. What is humanity for us? And what is a human person for us? It is not just an object to be used and discarded. It is rather somebody created in the image and likeness of God and therefore created with the dignity of God that God himself is bestowed. So with the dignity of the human person as a beacon, we try to follow on how we can therefore treat the human person in a way that is not dignity deficient, but rather dignity fulfilling. So this is the first task that I think we face. It is healing the human person itself by way of restoring its sense of dignity in its fullness. This is very crucial because it underlies a whole lot of other systems. If social structures that we live in have any vocation or any objective, it is to enhance, to ensure, to promote the dignity of all of us. And therefore, that being the case, the present pandemic is shown that sometimes we can suffer from dignity, a lot of structures which impose on us deficiency in our dignity, and there is a call, therefore, to heal all of that. So we begin by looking at the human person and how we can restore him in his fullness, the dignity and everything that he has. And that means that whatever structure creates dignity deficiency is a structure that we need to repair, beginning with access to health care. The pandemic is exposed poor access to public health care because of financial means, because of a lack of health care insurance structures and all of that. So that is one thing to heal. It's also exposed the lack of the dignity that has been eroded by people being rendered jobless and losing their jobs. And that also calls for a more robust system that ensures the dignity of people exercised through labor and exercised through work. It was Pope Francis who said that when a person does not work, he doesn't really fulfill the fullness of his dignity. So we also want to heal structures that would enable the human person to realize all his dignity by ensuring access to work and all of that. Secondly, we also want to recognize that in so doing, we necessarily probably need to put ourselves through some form of conversion. For we cannot consider ourselves to be part of the healing process without accepting to go through conversion ourselves. So we need to also consider to what extent we are part of the present problem and see what we can do to heal our own selves first before we can become healers of the system in society and everything else. So we need to become healed. We need to be healed to become healers ourselves in the present system that is before us.
Your minutes, you want to unmute yourself.
But I didn't see it. Okay, thanks. So our quest for promotion of the dignity of one another leads us to be also show concern for the common good. The common good from way back in the days of Aristotle was defined and presented as the responsibility of a community or society for the well-being of all its members. And if we feel with this sense of responsibility for the well-being of all members of community we live with, then it's not an option even to be concerned about the other. Recently, Pope Francis has powerfully demonstrated this by, with appeal to the parable of the Good Samaritan, where the person who shows himself to be a brother is not somebody who's known by a complete stranger, but who still decides to come close, to be interested in somebody's situation and try to bring healing to that kind of situation. So the sense of common good is that. Subsequently, other popes have referred to this as the need for social love, or as a need for a social system that ensures the well-being of each other. But it is so important that we commit. When we committed to promoting the dignity of people, then we should be necessarily committed to promoting the well-being, the common good of also all people. And this is, as it were, from the days of Aristotle, is a way society, members of a society express responsibility for all members of society to ensure that they live well and they live the well-being that ensures everybody together. So I recognize the time is run up a little bit. Therefore, in doing all of this, it is also the experience of our own global vulnerability that the pandemic has exposed us all to recognize how we need to connect. We need to connect as members of a human family. Recently, we invited to consider ourselves in terms of universal brotherhood of the human nature, the human being. Years back, we tried to express this with the expression of globalization. Under globalization, we try to express the fact that we all interconnected and interrelated, and that we bound together. But when we did that, it was Pope Benedict who reminded us that globalization has brought us together, but it has not quite made us brothers of each other. And that is the one thing that we invited to do now by the present Pope, which is a small encyclical letter reminding us that we are brothers. Fratelli tutti, all of us are brothers. And this expression is taken over from St. Francis of Assisi, who, though having started a religious congregation, was considered not in the sense of a leader of a religious group, but as a brother among a band of brothers. That's how Francis of Assisi was conceived of, a brother among a band of brothers. So the brotherhood invites us to see how we interrelated, so our dignities being the same, we try to live one with each other, respecting each other's dignity. But it also invites us to do something extra. It invites us to recognize that as brothers, it's not possible to have a brother, interesting thing here, I cannot help but recall this. The Greek word for brother, adelphos, means that we came from the same womb. Adelphos means, children from the same womb. And children from the same womb, with children from the same, it's not possible to have one child having more dignity than the other. Coming from the same womb, we necessarily share the same dignity. So the reference to the human race in terms of brotherhood is an invitation to recognize that coming from the same origin, at least we have one God, the Father, but we come from the same origin, the same wombs, which may not be the biological womb of a woman, but we share several wombs these days in history. The womb of a common world war, the womb now of a pandemic, the womb of a lot of social ills and inequalities. There are a lot of experiences which constitute the new womb, which, which out of which we all come. And these experiences foster and engender within us a sense of brotherhood, knowing that our lives are interconnected and our lives are interdependent. And so we need to come together to act to defeat the present pandemic and to build a new future. So what the experience of the experience we're making now does not invite for Lone Ranger ethic. None of us can be Lone Rangers. There's no room for Lone Rangers now. There's a room for more committed solidarity and acting together to be able to deal with the situation that we have. Internationally, people talk about multilateralism, but essentially it's an invitation to act in partnership to deal with the present situation. As you know, the challenges of the pandemic is also showing some weakness and cracks even within this. Every government feels obliged to get vaccines to celebrate its population and its citizens. Whereas the World Health Organization invites us to be more inclusive in fashioning access to the vaccine and to every therapy and cures that we can have. So the invitation is on us to go. At the end of the day, by way of conclusion, I think I've talked too much already. By way of conclusion, I like to say that the future that we are invited to fashion by the present experience of the COVID, recalling the words of Pope Benedict, is to face the reality realistically and not to yield to resignation, but with determination to fashion the future. And it will be to fashion a future in brotherhood, solidarity, committing to common ventures and common purposes together, and with that, fashion three crucial things for ourselves. Build robust systems which will not be crumbled by another epidemic in the near future. Strengthen our relationship and partnership with each other so we can easily come together as one family to fight against any conflict or tensions that we can have. And most importantly, to recognize that the dignity of the human person is such that it should be protected against all harm, be it that of joblessness, that of healthcare, that of education, and to ensure that for the human person, there are three basic expressions that we've always been used to talking about. A decent home, where to lay the head and start a family. A decent job with the wherewithal to maintain a family and to keep life going. And thirdly, some kind of asset that can enable somebody to plan a future and exercise his own dignity about taking decisions, planning, and making things work for himself and for his family. So briefly and hurriedly, these are some few thoughts that I'd like to share with you by way of thinking about life after the pandemic. It's a life that invites us to act now, to act in solidarity, motivated by our common brotherhood, to act to build robust structures and systems, to act to ensure the dignity of each one of us, and most importantly, to act in such a way that access to all social services would also be even and equal for all of us. So thank you, my Lord Archbishop, all of you, my dear bishops on the panel, and we look forward to sharing your own words of wisdom that you'll be sharing with us this morning. Thank you.